Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being with us. I know it's been a long 2.5 hours or so for you. I was a B-1 pilot for a lot of years, and we'd go out and do a combat exercise, and sometimes I felt like everyone in the world was firing missiles at me. You might feel that way this afternoon, and we appreciate your patience. And having said that, now I've got a couple of missiles, if I could. And Madam Secretary, maybe these aren't big issues for you. I hope that they are, and I think they probably would be, but I can promise you they're big issues for tens of thousands of good people in my district. And if we could just discuss two things very quickly. The Utah prairie dog is listed as an endangered species under ESA, and the federal government regularly counts these prairie dogs, but they only count them on federal lands. They don't count any of those prairie dogs that are existing on private lands. And surely you can see that that doesn't make any sense. These prairie dogs are not like Occupy Wall Street individuals. They're not hanging out in public parks and in public lands. They like to be where you and I are. They like to be where there's water, where there's cover, where there's grass, where there's green things. And yet the federal government doesn't count those prairie dogs. And again, it just simply doesn't make any sense. We can't delist them if we're not accurately counting them. And so, very quickly, mindful of your time, would you be willing to commit to work with my office to resolve this problem so that we can count all of the prairie dogs, not just those that are existing on public lands right now?
Congressman, my understanding is that when we do Endangered Species Act assessments, we count all animals on private or public lands because we have many endangered species that are on private lands. So I'll look into that with the department.
Please do, because what your response is the response that makes sense. But that's not what's happening in this case. And again, it simply is beyond reason why they wouldn't do that. And I appreciate your response because knowing that that's your frame of mind, that makes me hopeful that we could have a more reasonable response on this. The second thing, if I could, recently, March 20, the U.S. District Court in Utah ruled that the state of Utah had established title to 15 roads that had crossed public lands, lands that were owned by the United States. The state of Utah had asserted that these roads were public highways under RS 2477, which I know you're very familiar with. The troubling thing about that now is we're hearing rumors that the federal government may take extraordinary measures, even perhaps the right of eminent domain in order to close these public lands. And if that were to be the case, you could see the resentment and the frustration that many of these folks living in these rural counties would feel. They went through the court process. They had their day in court, and the courts found for them. And then to feel like the heavy hand of the government had come in and said, well, we're simply going to claim eminent domain and shut these roads anyway. And it's just not healthy. It's not healthy for the relationship between any of us for people to be so distrustful and frustrated with their federal government. Again, would you pledge to work with us to come to an outcome that didn't lead to that type of heavy-handed government claim?
It's my commitment to ensure that the decisions we make take into account the issues on the ground at a local level and encourage the people that work for me across the country to work with local communities to understand what those issues are, while also upholding the laws that I'm required to uphold, because of course if I don't, there's a lawsuit that results, and that doesn't help any of us. So certainly support working with people on the ground.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And there's two things that you said are very important. One of them is working with the people on the ground, because the local community really have a voice in this. They're the ones who are impacted by this. And again, you talk about upholding the laws of the land. This has been through the court system. The federal courts have ruled on this, and they ruled in favor of the local people who wanted access through these public roads. And it would seem to be completely beyond what you just expressed there to just say, well, we're going to disregard the court rulings and we're just going to claim eminent domain. So thank you, Madam, for being willing to work with us on that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that specific issue.
I understand, and I didn't expect that you would be. Heavens, you're new to this job, and there's 8 billion things coming at you at any given time, I understand. But this is important, and again, we hope to follow up with you with that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time.